Minister, I noticed the absence on the government benches today. I hope that's because they're down supporting the farmers and not intimidated from attending Dáil Éireann today. Minister, one of the strongest vestiges of our colonial mentality is if we continue to unthinkingly replicate the policies of other nations as though somehow they have things figured out. So we think that the Finns have the answer to homelessness, that we need to copy Amsterdam's nighttime mayor or implement the Kiwis' literacy programme. We have followed the Brits in their short-sighted rush to close down railway lines. We built Corbusier Towers blocks in Ballymun. That alone should remind us that we need to keep an eye on planners and their utopian visions of how other people should conduct their lives. It is a dangerous business, Minister, to tell people how to live, how to settle and how to raise a family. Yet planners look down their noses at the dominant vernacular settlement pattern of this land. Planners and urbanites are derisory and confounded by the townland formation, idealised in Yeats' Lake Isle, turned into a modernist manual in Jack Fitzsimon's Bungalow Bliss, where anyone, indeed almost everyone, could build and self-build a home by the age of 25 and clear the mortgage by 40. You could raise a family and they could live around you. Those houses grew with the people that made them, and they were altered and renewed to reflect the changing contours of people's life course. In revising our planning laws, you are recognising that they are not fit for purpose. But this House has been messing with the property market since Bacon, nudging and cajoling to spur on or throttle down supply and demand. It is hard to believe, Minister, that we will finally get it right in these revisions. And they certainly will not get it right if they do not provide a way back for one-off housing or vernacular form of settlement. You see, the key feature of self-built one-off houses is that they were never actually houses, they were always homes. I know you will probably rehearse the technical reasons why one-off housing is bad for the economy, for the environment and for society. And for each and every technical reason cited against one-off housing, be it sustainable transport and public services, quality water, waste infrastructure, there are various and many solutions, Minister. Solutions that allow us to keep some utility of our traditional settlement formation. The ideologues who, behind proper planning, have created told and untold misery in this country. Misery in terms of homelessness, in deferred adulting, the economic hardships and forced urbanisation, and not being able to conduct your life in the place where you were born. Their answer of higher density, forcing people to live in conditions most people in this House would not wish for themselves. It has thwarted and diminished lives, and it has shoved people into perma-renting for corporate investors. And the kicker to all this, Minister, is that we cannot even provide enough of these ideologically designed shoeboxes. So I ask you, Minister, any reform, please, needs to put citizens back in control of their housing destiny.
Thank you, Deputy Shanahan. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Shanahan, for your contribution. And just to say at the outset, of course, there is a role. I'm not opposed to one-off rural housing, and never have been. And actually, last year, 2022, there were over 5,500 one-off rural homes were actually built in 2022. It's about 16% up on the year before. We also, whilst we're doing that, need to make sure that we're revitalising our towns and villages. And that's why we've been very strong, and particularly in the Creekona vacancy grant, which we've had over 4,000 applications now to. That's the €70,000 for derelict, €50,000 for vacant, and the top up on our islands of an additional 20,000. That's been responded to really well, because I think what we need is we need sustainable rural communities, and sustainable rural communities need to be supported by planning policy. That's why I'm reviewing, I'll be bringing forward very, very shortly the Planning and Development Bill to Cabinet within the next 2 weeks, and intend to publish it here, and that we will debate that. And the rural guidelines are being prepared, the revised rural planning guidelines are being prepared in the department right now. But this government is not against rural housing, and I'm certainly, as Minister for Housing, not opposed to rural housing. And I think the numbers and the facts bear that out. And a couple of things I've done to support that. This week I met you at the ploughing earlier on. We've extended the first home scheme to one-off homes and to rural homes to self-builds. That's a really important departure. The first home scheme has been very successful. Deputy, we've had 6,000 registrations, 2,500 approvals plus, and now we're extending it to self-builds, which will be predominantly in the rural areas, and that's open for applications now. What I also ensured when I waived the development levy on developments for 12 months, which is saving on average about €12,700, and the Uisce Éireann connection charge, that also applies to one-off homes, not just to larger developments. And that's something that's in place for 12 months. That has been responded to well. I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing commencements continue to increase, because whether some wish to ignore it, and not yourself, others wish to ignore the economic environment that's out there and the funding environment. So we need to make sure that we can keep costs at a minimum. And that's why where the state can keep the costs down, we've done that with the development levies. And that waiver is in place, and it's in place for one-off homes. And very significantly, because we're seeing the biggest pickup on the vacancy grants in our rural counties. In counties where there's high levels of dereliction and vacancy. And that grant, as I said, over 4,000 applications. They're existing buildings, and from a climate perspective, also from a rural regeneration perspective, from a town centre first perspective, they make sense. But that grant also applies to one-off rural vacant homes as well. And we made changes, some of it at your own prompting, Deputy, and others on the other side of the House, to make sure that it's available to everyone. So I think the actions that I've taken and the measures that are in place that are actually working, and that inexplicably some others across the House will get rid of, which I don't understand. I know you're supportive of them, and we want to expand them out further and get more vacant homes back into use.
Deputy Shanahan.
Minister, I think there's always and often a disconnect between aspiration and output. And I hear what you're saying about in terms of trying to stimulate the economic conditions to deliver planning and to deliver particularly one-off housing. But I'm not seeing it in my constituency. And when I speak to my colleagues, I can tell you there is a lot of difficulty out there for people, particularly in the rural areas, in terms of securing planning permissions, be it for their children or for people who are caring for them or whatever. And you've mentioned it yourself, the need to try and absolutely reinvigorate and to support, our regional and particularly our rural populations. But I have a myriad of planning cases, not just in Waterford, but people that come to me from outside Waterford. And I just cannot see the justice or the logic that's being applied to the Minister. And I wonder at times, the planners, despite what you're saying, I think the planners have different minds and different guidelines. And I think we do need to have reform of the planning law, but we have to look at how we are supporting communities, because this is about allowing particularly our rural communities to refresh themselves and to continue into the future, Minister. And I would urge you with these planning reforms, please, to grasp them and make Ireland a more livable country.
Minister.
Look, it's many instances, Deputy, I understand what you're saying, where families or individuals will go and talk to their TDs, their public representatives, about planning is when there have been issues and when they haven't actually been able to get that planning, and seeking advice from deputies and councillors indeed. I'm just stating the facts of the delivery in 2022 was over 5,500 individual rural homes. I expect that to be more this year. There's no question that people will have well-held views with regard to different planning authorities maybe operating schemes differently, and that's why we are at the final stages of the preparation of the updated rural housing guidelines as well. The Planning and Development Bill, which I'll bring forward, as I said very shortly in my initial response to you, will also help, because we need a streamlined, modern planning system underpinned by modern legislation to deliver the infrastructure that we need, not just in housing, not just in rural housing, but across strategic infrastructure across the country. And that is a priority for this government, to get that legislation through as expeditiously as possible.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.